He's got 60 minutes left. Maybe less. The words land like a final blow. Billionaire Tony Wallace stands frozen outside the medical suite, his hands trembling, suit disheveled, face ghost pale. He's not a man known for weakness, but this is different. Inside, baby Andre lies still. His tiny chest rises unevenly. Cold skin. Slowing monitors. A fight nearly over. Doctors don't speak above a whisper now. Nurses walk like mourners. The mansion has never been quieter. It feels like death has already arrived. Dr. Harlow looks Tony in the eyes and delivers the verdict that breaks him. 60 minutes. Maybe less. Tony slumps to the floor, crushed under the weight of that sentence. His mind flashes. His wife's funeral. The promise he whispered to a newborn Andre. The vow he made to keep him safe. All of it slipping through his fingers. Downstairs, in the servants' quarters, Latoya Brown feels it, not just hears it. The change in rhythm, the fading pulse, the coming loss. She presses her hand to her chest. Tears come fast. Not like this, she whispers. Not today. And then she moves, fast, determined, to the back of a closet drawer. Fingers trembling, she pulls out a worn velvet pouch. Something passed down. Something hidden. Something that was never supposed to be used, unless all hope was gone. And now it is. Upstairs, Tony leans over his son, whispering goodbye. Downstairs, Latoya grips what may be his only chance. She closes her eyes and opens the pouch. Before we begin this heart-shaking story of love, loss, and the miracle no one expected, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Your engagement helps bring more people into these life-changing stories. Now let's dive in. Tony Wallace built his empire on the belief that anything could be bought: silence, loyalty, even second chances. But nothing prepared him for this room. Machines beeped in a stuttering rhythm. Andre lay still, his skin pale against the stark white sheets. Tubes snaked from his tiny body, like vines trying to hold on to life. The room was cold, but Tony was burning. He gripped the edge of the hospital bed, jaw clenched. His custom-tailored suit hung loose on him now, like everything else in his life. It didn't fit anymore. "Come on, son. Hang on," he whispered. "Daddy's right here." But no amount of money could bribe time. No contract could undo a failing heart. The door creaked behind him. Dr. Harlow stepped in with two nurses, faces drawn, voices low. "We've tried everything," the doctor said gently. "We're going to attempt one last protocol." But Tony didn't need to hear the rest. He already knew. They were out of weapons. Hope was now a whisper, and even that was fading. He stepped back as they moved in, hands shaking. He thought of the day Andre first crawled across the nursery floor, wobbling and giggling. He remembered his wife's laughter echoing off the marble walls, how she kissed both of them and said, "This is what forever feels like." But forever had been short. She was buried 2 years ago, and now her son was slipping away too. Tony turned toward the window. Outside, the world carried on. Cars moved. Birds flew. But inside, time was dying. Downstairs, in the servants' quarters, Latoya Brown pressed a hand to her chest. Her breath came in shallow bursts, heart pounding against her ribs. She heard the hurried footsteps above, the soft sob of a nurse, the silence between alarms. "No, Jesus, not him," she whispered. "Not today." She walked to her dresser, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out the faded velvet pouch, the one her grandmother gave her with trembling hands and firm instruction. "Only when the world gives up, child. Only then." She hadn't even opened it since. Latoya looked at the door, then back at the pouch. She could almost hear her grandmother's voice. Faith moves where medicine stops. Tears spilled down her cheeks. But what if I'm wrong? What if I make things worse? Still, her fingers tightened around the pouch. Upstairs, Andre's life was ticking down. If I don't do something, he will die. She closed her eyes. Lord, if this is from you, don't let me walk away. And then a sudden flicker. The lights in her room dimmed for half a second. The air shifted, almost like the room itself exhaled. Latoya opened her eyes. The velvet pouch in her hand felt warm. Latoya Brown had been raised in a house where the Bible sat on the kitchen table, opened more often than the refrigerator. Her grandmother, Mama Jo, was known across their small Louisiana town, not just for her gumbo, but for something deeper. Folks said her prayers stuck. Sick babies got better. Broken hearts mended. She never claimed magic, only faith. God made the plants before he made man, Mama Jo would say, mixing oils and herbs in quiet reverence. And he still heals, child, sometimes through hands like ours. Latoya learned to listen, not just with her ears, but her spirit. And on her 19th birthday, when Mama Jo grew frail and her voice slower, she handed Latoya a small velvet pouch. Use it only when there's no other door left open. It's for failing hearts and failing faith. Latoya had tucked it away, uncertain if she'd ever believe in something so bold. Then came the Wallace mansion. She had been hired as a maid, just a face among many. But Andre saw her. At barely 1 year old, he'd reached for her the first time. She brought him warm milk, latched onto her pinky, and wouldn't let go. Every time she entered the nursery, he'd light up like she was the whole sun. And then there was her, Tony's wife, elegant, kind, soft-spoken, pulled Latoya aside one day in the hallway. "If anything ever happens to me," she said, eyes glistening, "promise me you'll love him like he's yours." Latoya did, every day since, and now he was dying. In the dim light of her room, Latoya opened the pouch. Nestled inside, a tiny glass vial, wrapped in cloth embroidered with a hand-stitched cross. The liquid inside shimmered, not gold, not silver, something in between. Mama Jo never said what it was, only that it had been passed down for generations and blessed through tears and prayer. Latoya held it to her chest. "Father, I'm not a doctor. I'm just a maid with a memory and a mustard seed. But if this is what you gave me to give, I won't let him go without trying." She knelt, trembling, and whispered the 23rd Psalm through quivering lips. "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death." The words steadied her, reminded her who walked with her. She rose to her feet, slipped the vial into her apron pocket, and looked toward the stairs like they were a battlefield. "If I'm wrong, God, forgive me. But if I'm right, help me run." Without another second, Latoya bolted from the room, her footsteps light but fast. The house groaned beneath her as she took the stairs 2 at a time. In her pocket, the vial pulsed with warmth against her side. Upstairs, a flat line was beginning. Tony sat at his son's bedside, forehead resting on Andre's tiny hand. The boy's skin was cool, too cool. The monitors behind them hissed and clicked, each sound more uncertain than the last. "I'm sorry, buddy," Tony whispered, voice cracking. "Daddy tried everything." A long, low beat began to rise. Flatline. Then crash. The door slammed open. Latoya rushed in, hair wild, apron flapping, eyes full of fire and tears. "Wait," she shouted. Tony whipped around, startled. "What the—" "Get out," he barked, raw grief flaring into rage. Dr. Harlow stepped between them. "This isn't sterile security." "No," Latoya cried, holding out the vial like a weapon made of hope. "Please, just one chance. I love him. I can't stand here and do nothing." Tony's face twisted, fury, confusion, heartbreak all at once. What is that? It's from my grandmother, she said breathlessly. It's a remedy. Blessed, anointed, for failing hearts. Dr. Harlow scoffed. This is madness. That's not medicine. Neither is giving up, Latoya said softly, locking eyes with Tony. Please. I made a promise to his mother. Let me keep it. Tony stared at her. Everything in him screamed no. Logic said no. Science said no. But something deeper, something softer. Faith. His throat tightened. He looked at Andre, motionless beneath wires and white sheets. His baby boy. His miracle. And then his voice came, raw and broken. Do it. Latoya rushed to Andre's side, uncorked the vial with shaking fingers, and let 3 glowing drops fall onto his tongue. Then she dropped to her knees and prayed. The room went silent. The monitor beeped once. And then, flatline. The sound stretched out like a scream. Nurses gasped. One covered her mouth. Tony stumbled back, his face collapsing. Dr. Harlow lunged for the crash cart. We're losing him. No, Tony shouted. You said you tried everything. But this is nothing. The doctor fired back. Tony turned to Latoya. She didn't move. She didn't run. She just took Andre's hand in both of hers, leaned close to his ear, and whispered through her tears, Come back, baby, please. In Jesus' name, come back. The monitor stayed flat. For now. Flatline. That endless, merciless sound filled the room like a final breath held too long. Latoya never let go of Andre's hand. She squeezed it gently, her lips pressed against his temple. In Jesus' name, she whispered again, barely audible. Come back. Silence. Then, beep. So soft it felt imagined. Tony's head jerked up. Did you? Beep, beep. Stronger now. Steadier. Dr. Harlow froze mid-motion, eyes wide. What in the... The flat line dissolved into a faint, flickering rhythm. The monitor blinked with life. Andre's chest moved. Not the shallow, mechanical rise they'd been watching for hours, but deeper. Real. A breath pulled from somewhere beyond science. His fingers twitched. Tony staggered back, mouth open, then forward again, collapsing to his knees beside the bed. He gripped the railing like it was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. Dr. Harlow rushed forward, scanning the monitors. This shouldn't be happening. His vitals were gone. Andre's pulse climbed slowly, like a song finding its melody again. Oxygen levels followed. Blood pressure normalizing. Latoya could hardly breathe. She covered her mouth with trembling hands, tears rolling down in waves. Thank you, Jesus, she sobbed. Oh, thank you. The nurses stood frozen, mouths agape, eyes darting from screen to boy to heaven. Tony reached for Latoya, pulled her into him like a drowning man grabs a lifeline. He sobbed loud, broken, years of grief cracking open all at once. I thought I lost him, he cried into her shoulder. I thought. Latoya held him, weeping, too overwhelmed to speak. And then, Ma, it was barely a whisper. Raspy, fragile, but they both heard it. Andre's eyes fluttered open, hazy but alert. He looked at Latoya, blinking slowly. Ma, Tony gasped. Latoya fell to her knees beside the bed, tears dripping onto the sheets. Baby, I'm here. Andre's fingers found hers. The room erupted. One nurse dropped her clipboard. Another clapped a hand over her mouth, bursting into tears. Dr. Harlow just stared, shaking his head, whispering, It's not possible. But it was happening. Andre was alive. Not just surviving, coming back. Tony looked down at Latoya, his voice hoarse. What did you do? She didn't know what to say. All she could manage was, I believed. In the corner, a Bible sat unopened on the shelf. For years, It had collected dust in this house of wealth. But now the word had found a way in. And somewhere beyond what medicine could reach, something sacred had answered. Tony hadn't moved from Andre's side in hours. The machine still hummed, but now their rhythm comforted him. His son's chest rose and fell gently. No wires tugging at his small body. No alarms. Just peace. For the first time in days. Andre was sleeping. Really sleeping. Tony brushed a hand across his son's hair, then looked up as LaToya stepped quietly into the room. She paused at the door, uncertain. "Come in," he said softly, voice raw. LaToya walked closer, her hand still trembling from everything that had happened. She'd barely slept, barely breathed. Tony stood slowly, turned to face her, and broke. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. You saved my whole world." His voice cracked. "I spent my life chasing things that don't matter. Buildings, stock numbers, legacy, and I almost missed the only thing that does." He sank into the chair beside the bed, elbows on knees, head in his hands. "I would have buried my boy, LaToya." Tears streamed freely now. He didn't try to stop them. LaToya sat across from him, her heart full, her face wet too. "I didn't know it would work," she confessed. "I just knew I couldn't give up on him. He's never stopped fighting. I wasn't about to either." Tony looked up at her. "Why? Why would you risk everything?" She didn't hesitate. "Because love doesn't walk away. And I made a promise." His eyes searched hers. "To my wife." LaToya nodded. Tony wiped his face with both hands, overwhelmed. "I've been blind. For years. Thought I could buy control, plan for everything. But what happened in this room, that wasn't science. That was grace." As if on cue, Dr. Harlow walked in, clipboard in hand, his face still pale with disbelief. "We've run every scan. Blood work, imaging. His heart is functioning normally. Lungs are strong. Brain activity is clear." He shook his head. "This is medically unexplainable." Tony didn't even blink. "You're right. It wasn't medicine." The doctor hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Maybe not." LaToya folded her hands in her lap, whispering, "Thank you, Lord." Tony turned back to Andre, still peacefully resting. His tiny hand lay open beside him, like a small invitation to begin again. "I don't want to be the man I was," Tony said. "I want to be the father he needs. Less boardroom, more bedtime stories." LaToya smiled gently. "That's all he's ever wanted." The room fell quiet, sacred, still. Outside, dawn pushed through the mansion windows, soft golden light flooding the floor. Tony stood and kissed his son's forehead. "I don't deserve this miracle," he said. LaToya whispered, "None of us do. That's what makes it grace." Downstairs, the world waited. But up here, a father was being reborn. It started with the curtains. On the third morning after Andre's recovery, sunlight spilled through the mansion's east windows, something that hadn't happened in weeks. LaToya had pulled them open herself. The dust motes danced in the light like tiny angels. Andre giggled. The sound was soft, still weak, but it rippled through the walls like a melody returning to a place long silent. Tony looked up from his chair by the bed, startled by the laughter. He didn't say anything, just smiled and shook his head slowly, like he still couldn't believe this was real. Each day, Andre grew stronger. By the end of the week, he could sit up with help. The color returned to his cheeks. He followed movement with his eyes, especially when LaToya was in the room. She was always in the room, feeding him, reading him stories, singing old gospel lullabies Mama Jo used to hum. Sometimes Andre would hum back, off-key, but perfect. Tony watched it all. He noticed how his son only calmed when LaToya touched his hand, how her voice brought him peace faster than any medicine. How Andre's eyes tracked her even when she left the room for just a minute. And he noticed something else. The house was breathing again. Music played softly through the halls. Something LaToya had turned on in the kitchen. Staff who once walked like ghosts now smiled, exchanged stories, even laughed again. The chef baked bread just because it smelled like childhood. The walls no longer felt like tombstones. Tony began inviting LaToya into conversations. "What do you think he needs next?" he asked her during a medical briefing. LaToya blinked in surprise. "You're asking me?" "You brought him back," Tony said. "You know him better than anyone." And that was true. It wasn't just her intuition. It was the way Andre's eyes lit up when she came in, the way his body relaxed when she held him. So Tony gave her authority, quietly at first, a new room key, a new badge, eventually, a seat at the table when nurses discussed Andre's care. The staff noticed. She wasn't just the maid anymore. She was something else. Tony tried not to think too hard about what that something was, but he found himself watching her longer than he meant to, noticing the strength in her gentleness, the steadiness in her faith. She laughed once at something Andre did, full and warm, and Tony felt it in his chest. He looked away. "Don't go there," he told himself. "It's too soon." But still, he listened for her footsteps in the morning, and missed them when the house grew too quiet. In the home where death once hovered, life was beginning again, and something deeper was beginning too. Tony Wallace stood on the back lawn of his estate, staring at the rolled-out blueprints stretched across a long wooden table. The fall breeze lifted the corners slightly, and he pressed them down with both hands. "This," he said, more to himself than anyone else, "is what the future should look like." Across the lawn, laughter rang out, high-pitched, unfiltered, and full of life. "Andre." Tony turned and watched as his son tumbled into the grass, belly laughing while LaToya chased bubbles with him. The sight almost brought him to his knees. This was the miracle. Not just a heartbeat on a monitor, but this. Joy restored, peace returned, purpose reborn. He turned back to the plans. The new foundation would be called Andre's Light, a nonprofit focused on healing and supporting children with chronic and terminal illness. The first project, a state-of-the-art childcare wing on the estate grounds. Open doors, open hearts, no child forgotten. Tony murmured, tracing the mission statement etched at the bottom of the design. "Is that the final layout?" LaToya's voice came from behind him. Tony looked up, smiling. "Depends. Did you bring more red ink?" She smirked. "Just thoughts. The sunroom should face east, so the kids wake up to light. Also, we need a quiet space. For prayers, reflection. Healing's not just physical." Tony blinked at her. She wasn't just nurturing. She was wise. Brilliant, even. "I never would have thought of that," he admitted. LaToya shrugged gently. "You would have. You just needed time to listen deeper." They stood in silence for a moment, both watching Andre as he toddled toward them, arms out, cheeks flushed. Then, without hesitation, he crawled right into LaToya's lap. He nestled there, head against her chest, breathing slowly, holding her shirt in his small fist. Tony's throat tightened. He knelt down beside them, resting a hand on Andre's back. "He knows," Tony whispered. LaToya looked up, confused. Tony's voice was lower now, reverent. "He knows who saved him." Her eyes brimmed with tears. "It wasn't me, Tony. I was just the hands." Tony nodded, and those hands were covered in grace. Andre yawned against her, eyelids fluttering, then relaxed completely, safe in her arms. Tony watched them, something shifting inside him. Not a fleeting feeling, not a crush, but something rooted, sacred. He saw clearly now. This wasn't just a recovery. This was a rebuilding. And she wasn't a visitor in their life. She was part of it. Family. Chosen by faith, not blood. The house, once built on power, was now being rebuilt on love. And for the first time in years, it felt like home. The ribbon was red, Andre's favorite color. Dozens of people gathered under the fall sun, cameras flashing, hands clapping as the sign was unveiled. The Andre Wallace Children's Heart Center, a place of healing, hope, and grace. Tony stepped up to the podium, nerves visible in his grip on the edges. He didn't usually need notes, but today he carried them, just in case his heart spoke louder than his words. Today, he began, voice steady. We open more than a building. We open a door. For every family who's heard the words, there's nothing more we can do. I once believed that, too. He paused, glancing to the front row. Latoya stood beside Andre, holding his hand. He wore a tiny suit. She wore quiet grace. Tony smiled. This center wouldn't exist without one woman, he said, voice thickening. A woman the world almost missed. But God didn't. He looked at Latoya. She didn't just save my son's life. She reminded me what life is. The crowd applauded, many with tears in their eyes. Latoya's did not stay dry long. Later that evening, back at the mansion, Tony stood in his private study, pacing. The fire crackled behind him, low and warm. He turned as Latoya stepped inside. You wanted to see me? He nodded. Yes. Sit, please. She looked nervous. He looked emotional. I've been thinking a lot, he began. About this house. About Andre. About us. Latoya tilted her head. Tony swallowed hard. This home is no longer complete without you in it. Not as a guest. Not as staff. As family. Her lips parted, but no sound came. He continued, voice shaking. I want you to have lifetime security here. This home is yours as much as it is mine. I want you named as Andre's legal guardian if anything ever happens to me. I want to sponsor any education dream you've had but pushed aside. He took a step closer. And most of all, I want you to know there will always be a place for you here, by his side. And if in time you can find space in your heart by mine too. Latoya broke. Tears poured down her face as she covered her mouth, shoulders trembling. Tony, I'm just... He reached for her hand. You're not just anything, he said gently. You're the answer to a prayer I didn't even know how to pray. Just then, Andre toddled in, dragging his stuffed lion behind him. He saw Latoya's tears, frowned, and crawled onto her lap, wrapping his arms around her tightly. She held him, burying her face in his hair, sobbing freely now. Tony watched them both, heart full, past redeemed. Outside, the house glowed with light in every window. Laughter echoed down the hallways. Life had returned, and so had love. Sometimes the greatest miracles come not from the powerful, but from the ones the world overlooks. And when love builds something after a miracle, it's built to last.